What if I told you that Sukuna is not just one person, and that he may have a secret brother who is going to change everything in the Jujutsu Kaisen story? Some believe that Sukuna is so strong because he devoured his own brother and his brother's power, while others believe that his brother is still out there somewhere, waiting to be resurrected. But the craziest of all is the theory that Kenjaku created Yuji in order to turn him into a vessel for the reincarnation of the other Sukuna. Yuji could be Sukuna's long-lost brother, and we gotta talk about it right now. You guys know how this works. If you enjoy our JJK content and you want us to make more, leave a quick like and comment right now for that YouTube algorithm. And if you want to help this channel attain special grade status by hitting 2 million subscribers, do me a huge favor and subscribe right now. We are really close. Finally, this video will contain JJK manga spoilers, so please proceed with caution. You have been warned. The really cool thing about Jujutsu Kaisen is that many of its most powerful characters are based on actual mythological figures from Japanese history and folklore. I recently made an entire video on how the truth about Gojo's rebirth may have already been foreshadowed through the life of Michizane Sugawara, Satoru Gojo's ancestor and the progenitor of the entire Gojo clan. But Ryomen Sukuna himself is also based on a mythological figure from our own world. This mythological Sukuna is first mentioned as early as 720 AD, which is over 1,300 years ago. This actually predates the Heian period of Japanese history, meaning that Sukuna can be traced back to the older Nara period. And even in those portrayals from the Nara period, he was said to have lived hundreds of years earlier, maybe even as early as 377 AD. It was during the Nara period that an extremely important historical document was compiled, and this is the document from which Gege seems to be getting a lot of his inspiration for the JJK story. The name of this document is the Nihon Shoki, also known as the Chronicles of Japan. This is believed to be the second oldest recorded text in Japanese history, and it contained a detailed record of the history of Japan up to that point. Now, it's important to note that back in that time, it's hard to distinguish history from folklore and mythology, because people from back then believed that myths and legends were historical facts, and mythical creatures and even gods actively influenced the human world. The Sukuna who is mentioned in this text has 4 arms and 2 faces, which is similar to Ryomen Sukuna's final form in Jujutsu Kaisen. But the Sukuna from the Nihon Shoki also has 4 legs. He was described as extremely tall, over 3 meters, and he was said to possess superhuman combat abilities. The Nihon Shoki portrays Sukuna as a being that we fans of Jujutsu Kaisen are quite familiar with. He is described as an evil mass murderer who defied the Emperor's wishes and decided to rebel against him. Since the Emperor was believed to have a divine mandate from heaven, any rebellion against him was immediately considered evil and demonic. And Sukuna was blamed for the deaths of tens of thousands of people due to his sinful decision to oppose the Emperor. Sukuna's rebellion was finally thwarted after the Emperor sent his shogun Takefurukuma no Mikoto to kill him. And since he was such a dangerous enemy of the Emperor, for centuries to come he would be presented as a demonic murderer who killed and even devoured thousands of people. A symbol of evil, aggression, and chaos, a living natural disaster, a walking calamity. Even to this day, this is the prevailing image of the mythological Sukuna in modern-day Japan. So it makes sense that the character of Sukuna in Jujutsu Kaisen would be portrayed in a similar way. But did you know that there is a completely different side to the Sukuna story? If you look at the local legends of the old Hida province, today part of the Gifu prefecture in Japan, there is a completely different Sukuna that emerges. Hida province is allegedly where the evil Sukuna launched his rebellion against the Emperor back in ancient times. But even to this day, some locals in that area worship and venerate Sukuna as a benevolent guardian. To the locals of this area, Sukuna is not some demonic murderer. Instead, he is portrayed as the person who introduced Buddhism to this region, and according to local legend, he protected the people of Hida from monsters, including an evil dragon. In these circles, Sukuna has even been referred to as the incarnation of Kanon, the bodhisattva of compassion and mercy, which is among the highest forms of praise that you could ever bestow upon anyone within the Japanese Buddhist tradition. So, what is going on here? It's like there are literally 2 completely different Sukunas. One is a benevolent guardian who preached Buddhism and compassion, and who risked his life to protect the local people from monsters. The other is a demonic mass murderer who tried to overthrow the divinely appointed emperor and plunge the entire country into chaos. You might be tempted to think that we're talking about totally different people who just happen to share the same name, but since we're talking about the same time period and the exact same part of the country, that is unlikely. As we all know, history is written by the victors, and one theory about Sukuna's true origins is that he was a local ruler of Hida province who tried to protect the province's independence by resisting the expanding rule of the emperor. Essentially, he wanted the local people to govern themselves instead of being subject to imperial rule. And since that historical text I mentioned earlier, the Nihon Shoki, was compiled by the emperor and his family, they made the conscious decision to literally demonize Sukuna. Even though Sukuna might have actually been loved by his own people, because he dared to oppose the emperor and his divine right to rule, Sukuna was presented as a bloodthirsty mass murderer and a walking calamity that threatened to destroy all of Japan. When you really think about it, it's easy to understand how something like this could happen. The emperor believed that he had the God-given right to rule all of Japan, and every local ruler had the duty to bow and obey. But the people of Hida province may have seen the imperial army as invaders who were trying to take away their independence and force them into servitude. The locals saw Sukuna as their guardian, someone who fought for their freedom against an invading army, against an evil dragon. On the other hand, the loyalists of the emperor saw him as a menace who was rebelling against the authority of the heavens themselves. Both things can be true at the same time, just depending on which perspective you take. And since the emperor's forces ultimately won out in the end, they got to write the history books. Literally, they wrote the Nihon Shoki and they described Sukuna as an evil demon. Most of Japan eventually accepted this version of the story, and only a few locals inside of Hida province remembered the truth about Sukuna, and that is why they continued to quietly venerate him. I really like this idea of there being two completely different Sukunas, even though they are the same person. The difference is only in which perspective you take. But at the same time, it's possible that Sukuna really was two people, and that he might have had a brother who fought alongside him in his war against the emperor. It's kind of strange that the Nihon Shoki describes Sukuna as being a 3-meter tall monster with 2 faces, 4 arms, and 4 legs. It's almost as if Sukuna was 2 people fused together, which is what made Sukuna so much stronger than a normal person. Now, if we assume that the historical Sukuna, like the one who is mentioned in the Nihon Shoki, wasn't an actual inhuman monster, then we have to ask ourselves where this idea of someone looking like 2 people fused together even came from. Could it be that the rebel leader of Hida province, Sukuna, was actually 2 separate individuals, perhaps 2 brothers, who fought together as one? In fact, maybe they fought together so effectively that to their opponents, it seemed like they were fighting a single monstrous enemy with 4 legs, 4 arms, and 2 faces, one in front of his head and one on the back. I could totally see these 2 brothers standing back to back and fighting together with incredible coordination, which made the enemies who are rushing at them feel like they are fighting one massive monstrous body, one single superhuman man. And especially if they are brothers who look alike, or maybe even identical twin brothers who look exactly alike, this would further promote the narrative that this was one demonic person instead of 2 extremely skilled and highly coordinated warrior brothers. So, at least in terms of the historical Sukuna, this could be the explanation for why this legendary individual has such an unusual double body. It makes sense for the Nihon Shoki to promote this narrative of Sukuna being a single monstrous enemy, because that sends the message that only an inhuman demon would dare oppose the emperor. A normal human would never even think to do such a thing, so if you happen to have only 2 arms and 2 legs and 1 face, and if you're not an evil bloodthirsty demon, then you would never even consider standing against your emperor. But okay, the brother thing could be an explanation for Sukuna's unusual body in our own world. And yet, the world of Jujutsu Kaisen is a fantasy where the existence of monstrous creatures is possible. Under those circumstances, maybe we don't need a brother at all. Nevertheless, in Jujutsu Kaisen, we have been told that Sukuna started out as human, but that he eventually became the king of curses and the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer in history. So he didn't always have that monstrous double body, he only attained it later. This has led some fans to speculate that he might really have had a brother, but perhaps he devoured his own brother and consumed the brother's power. which is why Sukuna has 4 eyes instead of 2, 4 arms instead of 2, and 2 mouths instead of 1. It is also why he seems to possess a second fire-based innate technique on top of his regular slashing technique. Maybe Sukuna had a twin brother that he devoured in the womb, or maybe he was born with a conjoined twin. Or maybe he just had a regular brother, but at some point in history he killed his own brother and consumed his brother's body and power. Or it might have been something less sinister than that. Let's assume for a moment that Sukuna from Jujutsu Kaisen was also a local ruler who rebelled against the emperor, like the mythological Sukuna in our own world. Perhaps he and his brother fought against the emperor together, but then his brother was killed, and Sukuna consumed his brother's body and power afterwards in order to ensure that his brother will live on in some way. This could also explain why the Sukuna from JJK became evil. After losing his brother and possibly everyone else he loved and cared about in that war against the emperor, Sukuna stopped caring about humanity in general, because all of the humans he cared about were already dead. He wanted revenge against the rest of the world for what happened to his loved ones, and since he was now more powerful than ever before, he was able to become the notorious King of Curses, the walking calamity. Now, I think that something like this would be a really great backstory for Sukuna, and it would add additional layers to his already interesting character. But could any of this have a real effect on what is actually happening in the story right now, or is it all just random lore and world building? I think that Sukuna's brother, the other Sukuna, could definitely come into play in the modern era and in the current arc of the story through none other than our protagonist, Yuji Itadori. We knew from the very beginning that Yuji's body was special. He had super strength, he had super speed, super endurance, and then when he ate one of Sukuna's fingers, he became the first vessel that could actually control and suppress Sukuna inside of him. He was able to do this even after eating multiple fingers, and Gojo stated that someone like this appears only once every 1,000 years. In fact, Yuji likely would have been able to control Sukuna even after consuming all 20 of his fingers, as long as he consumed them one by one and actually spaced them out. That is obviously not how a normal human body works, and Mahito gave us additional clues when he revealed that Yuji has the unique ability to actually hurt a person's soul, not just their body. Mahito also states that Yuji has a unique understanding of the contours of a human soul. And then there's the fact that Yuji's soul managed to survive the death of his physical body for quite a long time, before his body was eventually revived by Sukuna. All of these factors about Yuji seemed extremely unusual, but everything finally started to make sense when we learned that Yuji was actually a human experiment created by none other than the evil sorcerer Kenjaku, the same evil sorcerer who helped Sukuna turn himself into a cursed object and then be reincarnated into the modern era. The same sorcerer who made dark deals with a whole bunch of ancient sorcerers and created the culling game. And the same sorcerer who used human experimentation to create the cursed wombs. As it turns out, Kenjaku is actually Yuji's mother. More specifically, he took control of Yuji's mother's body and then went through the trouble of giving birth to Yuji. Obviously, Kenjaku would not have gone through all of that for just anyone, so we know that he definitely had some big plans for Yuji. We don't know what exactly these plans were, but it's safe to assume that Yuji's superhuman abilities are the direct result of Kenjaku's human experimentation. And there is one thing that Gojo said all the way back in chapter 12. He said that as Sukuna's vessel, Yuji's body would eventually learn how to use Sukuna's own innate technique. And recent events in the manga are hinting that this very thing may finally be happening. If Sukuna really had a brother, either a twin brother or a regular brother, and that brother somehow died in the distant past, could Kenjaku be trying to revive him? What if Yuji's unique body and his incredibly rare ability to control Sukuna inside his body came from the fact that he was created using something that belonged to Sukuna's brother? Either a piece of his flesh or a cursed object or something along those lines. Yuji could be in the process of becoming the other Sukuna, someone who shares Sukuna's DNA and his innate techniques, and someone who might have once fought alongside Sukuna as his own brother. Let's be real, Kenjaku always knew that bringing Sukuna to life in the modern world would be extremely dangerous, and he knew that once he opened this Pandora's box, there would be no way to actually control Sukuna. If Sukuna decided to go against Kenjaku for whatever reason, it is entirely possible that Kenjaku would have no way of keeping Sukuna in line. And so, all of the plans that Kenjaku spent 1,000 years trying to bring to fruition would collapse. So, what if Kenjaku created an insurance policy? What if Kenjaku created Yuji as the coming reincarnation of Sukuna's brother? The only person who could potentially stand up to Sukuna in case Kenjaku's master plan became derailed by Sukuna's power and uncontrollable personality. What if Yuji is the other Sukuna? And what if he has the ability to not only learn Sukuna's innate technique, but to also one day rival Sukuna himself in terms of power and potential? If Yuji can learn to use Sukuna's innate technique, and if he can combine that with his own unique ability to affect the souls of others, he may become humanity's only hope of actually defeating the absolute monster that is Ryomen Sukuna. What do you guys think? Did Sukuna have a brother, and did he maybe consume his brother and take his power? Or could we actually see that brother reincarnating into the modern world sometime in the future, maybe with Yuji Itadori as his vessel? Drop all your craziest theories down in the comments below. If you're looking for an epic JJK video to watch next, don't ignore my video about how the truth about Satoru Gojo's ancestor may have already foreshadowed Gojo's rebirth. Link on screen and in the description. If you enjoy our Jujutsu Kaisen content and you want us to keep it coming in the future, leave a quick like and comment right now. And if you want to help this channel attain special grade status by hitting 2 million subscribers, do me a big favor and subscribe right now. We are so close.